What happens when the fastest killers in the jungle team up with the quietest? What do you get when raw American aggression meets cold Australian silence? In the jungles of southern Vietnam, where rivers twisted through triple canopy darkness and enemy supply lines slipped like snakes through the underbrush, two of the deadliest special forces units of the war came together not to compete, but to cooperate. The United States Navy SEALs, masters of shock, speed, and violent precision, and the Australian SAS, ghosts of the foliage, who could lie motionless for hours just meters from the enemy without ever being seen. They weren't built the same. They didn't move the same. But for one mission they shared the same trigger. This is the story of a joint ambush, 2 kill zones, 1 philosophy. No enemy leaves alive. The objective was clear. A Viet Cong logistics unit was expected to pass through a narrow corridor, a bottleneck of jungle, flanked by a shallow stream and a dry forest path. Intelligence suggested officers were among them. Maps, radios, maybe even intel caches. But the location was a trap waiting to be sprung. The SAS would move first, set the first kill zone, dig in, and vanish. The SEALs would come later, faster, louder, positioning behind the expected enemy path to close off escape. It was a perfect hammer and anvil. But the timing had to be flawless. Different men, different doctrines, one mission, one philosophy. Let them all walk in, then close the jaws, and let hell begin. The intelligence came in through SIGINT and a pair of bruised VC prisoners who talked after a little persuasion. A North Vietnamese Army logistics unit was moving south, running supplies along a narrow jungle corridor near the Cambodian border. About 30 men, maybe more. Weapons, ammunition, documents, possibly a political officer in tow. The path they were using wasn't marked on any map, but the Australians had walked it before. They'd observed signs weeks earlier. Boot impressions, bamboo cut low at the stalk, clay smudges where men had knelt. And now, all signs pointed to one thing. The enemy was coming through again, and this time, the Allies were going to be waiting. The terrain was perfect and brutal, a natural bottleneck choked between a muddy creek and a sharp ridgeline, thick with bamboo and elephant grass. To the east, a dry creek bed curved like a knife through the underbrush. To the west, a sparse patch of high ground offered limited cover, but maximum visibility if you knew how to use it. For a unit trained in ambush warfare, it was the kind of place that felt like it had been drawn by hand. Command didn't want a raid. They wanted a trap. Enter the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. 4 operators would move first, silent and slow, laying in along the ridgeline, kill zone 1. Their job wasn't just to shoot. It was to disappear, wait, observe, and strike when the enemy was deepest in the open. Patience, silence, and one well-placed shot to break the spine of the column. The U.S. Navy SEALs would insert after. 6 men, fast, precise, aggressive, moving through the creek bed, flanking from the rear. Their job, seal the back door, kill zone 2. If the VC turned and ran, they'd run straight into the Americans. 2 kill zones, 1 hammer, 1 anvil. The Australians brought the stillness. The Americans brought the violence. The plan was built on a delicate equation of trust. The SEALs had to believe the SAS would know exactly when to open fire. The SAS had to believe the SEALs would be in position, silent, invisible, watching. No radio calls, no countdowns. Just a timing window, a movement cue, and a silent agreement. When one kills, the other follows. The combined patrol was briefed face-to-face the night before. No rank, no ego. Just a topo map scratched with grease pencil lines and 2 fingers tapping at 2 red X's. "Let them all enter the box," one SAS trooper said softly. "Then we shut it." The SEAL team leader nodded. No one walks out. There would be no second chances, no reinforcements, no fallback. Once the shooting started, it would be over in under 2 minutes, or it would go to hell. But both teams knew their part. Both had done this before, just never together. And in the darkness before dawn, 2 squads from 2 nations moved into position, one to wait, one to strike. And between them, a narrow jungle trail where the enemy was already marching. The Viet Cong column, 25 to 30 strong, moved steadily along the trail, talking in low tones, weapons slung casually. They had no idea death was watching from both sides. Their boots kicked up damp earth. Their radios hissed with static. One soldier paused to light a cigarette, the flame flaring for a split second before vanishing into the green haze. From above on the ridge, the SAS waited. One trooper adjusted the tension in his grip ever so slightly, his gloved finger resting outside the trigger guard. He could see the folds in the enemy's uniforms, the crusted mud on their packs, even the rivets on the AK sling. Every breath he took was slow, silent, filtered through his nose and damp cloth. He had been lying in that position for 6 hours. Across the kill zone, the SEALs watched from the creek bed, each man a dark shape hidden behind vines and roots. One held an M60 belt-fed machine gun, barrel fixed just above the brush. Another crouched behind a termite mound, thumb on the safety of his Car-15, eyes locked on the rear of the column. Both teams had learned one truth: firing too early was death. You didn't open up when you could kill a few, you waited until you could kill them all. The column kept moving. The box was almost full. Now came the hard part: coordination without words. There was no radio chatter, no countdown, no whispered cues. The signal would be visual, subtle, planned in advance. A slight movement of a hand from the SAS patrol leader. A small mirror flash in the canopy, a prearranged glint only visible to the SEALs downstream. And then, the final confirmation. The last man in the VC column stepped past the creek bed, brushing a branch aside as he walked. The enemy was now surrounded. 30 men in the kill box. One heartbeat. One signal. And then the quiet would be replaced by something else entirely. The Viet Cong patrol was now fully inside the trap. From the ridge above, the SAS patrol leader didn't move. His eye stayed fixed through the iron sights, tracking the center of the column. He could see the radio operator adjusting his handset. A junior officer walked nearby, his uniform cleaner than the rest, a folded map sticking from his chest pocket. High-value target. But still, no one fired. In the creek bed below, the SEALs crouched in perfect silence. One had his finger on the butterfly trigger of the M60, but the barrel hadn't twitched. Another gripped the curved body of an M79 grenade launcher, its safety off, sights aligned. A third counted the seconds under his breath. No one breathed too loud. No one blinked too fast. And still, no one fired. The tension in the jungle became unnatural. Even the birds had gone quiet. The VC point man looked over his shoulder, paranoia, maybe, or just instinct. But he saw nothing. Just trees, just brush, just silence. The discipline was terrifying. 30 enemy troops within meters of both fire teams, and yet the trigger remained untouched. Why? Because this was the difference. This wasn't a chaotic firefight in the Mekong. This wasn't a desperate last stand in a rice paddy. This was craftsmanship. A kill that had been planned, rehearsed, and now executed with surgical patience. Every second of restraint was a sharpened edge. The signal was close. The SAS leader painfully slowly raised 2 fingers from his grip, held them still in the air for 3 seconds, then dropped them. The man next to him nodded once. No sound. Just readiness. Across the jungle floor, the SEAL team leader spotted a faint reflection flash through the canopy, the mirror glint. The final confirmation. They were go. The last man in the VC column had stepped past the final trigger point. The box was closed. The SEAL gunner's breath steadied. The SAS sniper adjusted his cheek weld, and somewhere in the center of that quiet, lethal jungle, a whisper of breath, a blink, a trigger pulled. The first shot didn't echo, it punched. A 7.62mm round crashed through the jungle air, striking the VC radio operator in the throat, ripping him backward before he hit the ground. The man beside him opened his mouth, but the second shot struck him in the chest before a sound escaped. Then, everything exploded. The jungle went from breathless silence to violent chaos in half a second. The first 2 shots from the SAS patrol had barely landed before the SEALs opened up with brutal force from the rear. The jungle corridor, once a quiet trail, was now a furnace of gunfire and death. The SEAL gunner squeezed the trigger of the M60 and walked the barrel across the column, carving through bodies like a scythe. Belts of ammunition fed through his hands as brass sprayed around him. To his left, a SEAL with an M79 fired a 40mm grenade into the cluster of VC in the center of the trail. It landed behind a fallen pack and erupted with a dull thump, sending dirt, leaves, and men into the air. The Viet Cong tried to react, some dove off the trail. Others fired blindly into the foliage, but they were already too deep. Running forward meant hitting the SAS kill zone. Turning back meant running into American machine guns. From above, the Australians remained surgical. No panic, no wasted fire. 1 round, 1 kill. An SAS marksman took down a man reaching for the fallen radio. Another fired 2 quick shots at a VC soldier crawling toward the jungle line. One missed by inches. The second snapped his spine. Meanwhile, the SEALs didn't stop moving. They advanced slightly with each burst, tightening the rear chokehold, calling short-range target cues through clenched teeth. Left, 2 trees, reloading, frag out. A fragmentation grenade landed near the base of a tree where 2 VC had taken cover. It detonated in a flash of shrapnel and screams. A handful of Viet Cong tried to push east, away from both lines, but one of the SEALs anticipated it. He popped up, fired 2 quick bursts from his Car-15, then dropped and vanished back into the mud like a shadow. The entire ambush lasted less than 2 minutes, and then silence again. Not the peaceful silence from before. This one was heavy, final. The kind of silence that hangs in the air after something living has been erased. The smoke drifted through vines, shell casings cooled in the dirt, leaves fluttered down where branches had been torn by bullets, and all around the trail bodies. Still, some twisted in positions of panic, others frozen mid-step. The kill box had held. 2 kill zones, 1 philosophy. Let them in, end it fast, leave nothing. And that's exactly what had happened. The gunfire had stopped, but the mission wasn't over. In fact, the most important part had just begun. Within 30 seconds of the last shot, both teams were moving calmly, efficiently, with the kind of practiced choreography that came only from experience. There was no cheering, no high fives, only focus. The SEALs were the first to sweep the kill zone. 2 of them moved quickly through the bodies, checking for any survivors. 1 Viet Cong soldier groaned, half buried beneath a dead comrade. A single suppressed shot silenced him. The team leader knelt by the man they believed to be the political officer. Map pouch, radio, clean boots, intel jackpot. He took the pouch, searched the pockets, and handed the contents to another SEAL, who sealed them in a waterproof satchel. Time spent on target, less than 20 seconds. Meanwhile, the SAS were already doing what they did best, disappearing. 2 of them remained behind just long enough to cover the SEALs, while the others began the deliberate task of erasing their presence. Brass casings were quickly swept into small sandbags. Tracks were scuffed with foliage. Spent magazines were accounted for, and even grenade pin rings were collected. 1 trooper used a bamboo branch to blur the drag marks, where a wounded VC had crawled before dying. Their movements weren't rushed, but they were fast. To any enemy patrol arriving later, the scene would look like a ghost attack. No clear direction of fire, no footprints, no cigarette butts, just bodies, scattered casings, and confusion. Within 5 minutes, both teams had regrouped at the exfiltration point, a narrow LZ carved into the jungle by earlier reconnaissance. A small smoke signal was triggered, white, faint, just enough for a fast-moving slick to see from above. They didn't speak much. A nod here, a glance there. The SEALs formed a wide perimeter, weapons still hot, eyes scanning the green wall for signs of movement. The Australians crouched low, conserving energy, already checking their gear for anything left behind. The chopper came in low and fast, barely flaring as it hovered 6 feet off the ground. Rotor wash flattened the tall grass. One by one, the men climbed aboard SAS first, then SEALs. The last man in tossed the intel satchel inside and gave a final glance to the jungle before lifting off. Within seconds, they were gone. The clearing returned to stillness. And below, on that muddy trail now littered with the dead, the only sound left was the rustling of leaves slowly returning to their natural place. No footprints, no signs of a joint operation, no trace of who had pulled the trigger. Only the result remained, 30 enemies dead, 0 casualties, 0 witnesses, just silence, and the memory of 2 teams that worked like opposites, but struck like one. When the dust settled, both literally and historically, what stood out wasn't just the success of the ambush, it was how it had succeeded. The Americans and Australians fought differently. The SEALs were forged in speed and violence, born from naval commando roots and trained for hit-and-run raids, demolitions, and maritime sabotage. They specialized in surgical aggression. Their doctrine valued initiative, adaptability, and overwhelming force. In the jungle, that meant fast insertions, controlled chaos, and the kind of firepower that ended fights before the enemy could react. The SAS were the opposite in almost every way. They were the masters of absence, designed to vanish into the jungle for days or weeks at a time. Their strength wasn't in firepower but in the patience to wait. They could crawl for hours, observe for days, and lie motionless for so long that the jungle forgot they were there. Their doctrine prized stealth, endurance, and discipline above all else. If the SEALs were a scalpel moving fast through the dark, the SAS were the silence before the blade ever moved. And yet, in that ambush, those differences didn't conflict. They complemented each other. The SAS were the trap, the invisible line drawn across the jungle trail. Without them, the enemy might have sensed something was wrong, might have spotted a glint, heard a cough, and broken contact before entering the kill box. The SEALs were the hammer, the violent weight that fell the moment the box was closed. Without them, the column might have scattered, some escaping through the rear and living to fight another day. That mission worked because neither tried to change the other. The SEALs didn't slow down. The SAS didn't speed up. Instead, they trusted. One trusted the other to stay invisible. The other trusted the first to arrive on time and bring the storm. Even their communication showed this mutual respect. There were no egos in the briefing. No one needed to lead. Each team understood their role, and more importantly, understood why their counterparts' method worked. The Australians admired the raw aggression and tight coordination of the SEALs, the way they could create chaos without becoming chaotic themselves. The SEALs, in turn, were awed by the stillness of the SAS, the kind of terrifying calm that came from hours of lying within arm's reach of the enemy without ever being noticed. It was, in the end, 2 philosophies written in different languages, but speaking the same truth. Kill fast, disappear faster, leave no trace, and for a brief moment, in the jungles of Vietnam, those 2 philosophies didn't just align, they became one, a perfect, deadly harmony. And the enemy never even saw it coming. Back at base, there was no ceremony, no debrief with fanfare, just scribbled notes, stripped magazines, and steam rising from jungle-wet uniforms. The SEALs cleaned their weapons, the Australians cleaned their boots, and between them quiet glances, a few nods, and the kind of silence that meant more than words. They had triggered hell together, and won. But what lingered afterward wasn't adrenaline, it was respect. The SEALs had seen their share of violence. They had led raids upriver, taken fire at midnight, fought off ambushes with nothing but instinct and grit. But this? Watching the SAS melt into the jungle, hold their fire until the exact second, and vanish without leaving so much as a footprint, it left an impression. One SEAL would later write in his notebook, "They didn't just move with silence, they became it." The Australians, in turn, had long observed the American way, loud, fast, direct. At times, they dismissed it as reckless, but that day they saw something else, precision under fire. The SEALs hadn't broken the trap, they had completed it. Their violence was not chaos, it was orchestration, and when it came time to extract, there was no panic, no confusion, just movement, discipline, and mutual coverage. One SAS corporal would later remark, "They didn't fight like us, but they fought like they knew exactly what we needed." In the end, it wasn't just the kill count that mattered, though it had been clean. It was the philosophy that had emerged from that corridor of death. 2 different doctrines, one built on silence, one built on speed. And yet both rooted in the same core: efficiency, control, and the refusal to be seen unless it was already too late. That mission would never make headlines. No medals would be pinned for it. It would live only in the after-action logs, some redacted, some forgotten. But for the men who crawled into that jungle together and came out with no casualties and 30 confirmed enemy KIA, it was something more. It was proof that doctrines didn't need to clash. They could complement, they could adapt, and under the right conditions, they could merge, if only for a moment, to create something lethally perfect. 2 kill zones, 2 teams. 1, unspoken promise. You do your job, I'll do mine. And when the time comes, well, make them regret ever stepping into this jungle. And that's exactly what happened. Not with bravado, not with glory, but with silence, fire, and a level of trust forged only by those who've shared the same trail and made it out alive.